coming under the proper stars. He knew which star to head for at night, and they kept going in a westerly direction. We sailed right into the harbor at Rio de Janeiro. So that was one case where we saved 35 lives, and before the end of the war, I'm sure that it amounted to 400 or 500 people who were probably saved as a result of our simplified navigation. Basically, if you had a watch and you could time the sun comes up and the time the sun sets, and you looked at the little chart that we put together, you could tell what position, north or south of the equator, what latitude you were in, just by the length of the time of the day, and this little chart that we had. And the other thing is that certain stars go over certain pieces of land every night all through the year, and those stars can be a guide to bring you into that harbor. There are certain stars that go over the island of Bermuda, certain stars that go over Tahiti, some go over Hawaii, and the Polynesians used to go 2,000 and 3,000 miles at sea and find these islands just using the stars as a guide.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was the basis for the article that was put together with the help of many, many people that I contacted, including professors in astronomy, historians who had studied how the Polynesians navigated, and that's how that resulted. So that, I think, was one of the things that we like to brag about. In boat racing, of course, we were pretty successful.
Mm-hmm.
And we did that as a family unit as much as possible, so that when we raced, children participated as part of the crew. And it was a good way of learning discipline, because if they didn't do what they were taught and something went wrong and we lost the race, they felt badly about it. And it didn't happen the next time. And as a result of that, we won the Bay Championship in the cruising class 3 years in a row, racing essentially with our own family.
Okay, you have some stories about Uncle Ira, your uncle?
Okay, well, Uncle Ira was an interesting character, and I think I mentioned about him before,
Mm-hmm.
in which he never touched a drop of alcohol, was a man of very high principles, but he was hired to bring, in the days of Prohibition, you couldn't buy alcohol or drinks in stores like we have nowadays, and they call that Prohibition. It was prohibited to sell liquors in the United States. And so they used to be smuggled in like the drugs are smuggled in today. And my Uncle Ira was hired to go out beyond the 12-mile limit where the ship was located, bring in the hooch, the liquors, and he was paid to do it. And Uncle Ira was a regular daredevil.
Wasn't it $500 a night?
Yeah, $500 a trip.
It's a lot back then.
And when he, and at that time, $5,000 would buy you a house, so you can see how much money that was. So it was big pay for what he was doing.
Mm-hmm.
But he was generous with his money and did not blow it on wine, women, and song, but blew it on his family and on his social obligations. And when they finally caught up with him after 3 years of successfully evading the Internal Revenue service. That was the name of the service then that used to go after them. They now have the Coast Guard that's replaced that service. So after 3 years, somebody tipped off the Coast Guard that he was going to come into Rocky Point at a certain time, and as he pulled into the dock, there's all the policemen with their Tommy guns all focused on him.
What kind of boat did he have?
He had a boat called the Black Duck, which was like a oversized PT boat used in World War II. And it was the fastest thing around. It would do over 40 knots with a full load on. Not the captain, but the ship had a full load on. And that was faster than any of the revenue cutters that they had at that time.
And didn't he have a metal front?
He had a pilot house so designed that there was armor plate with holes.
So be
and when they did chase him, they used to shoot bullets right through the wheelhouse trying to get him. And he'd just lay down behind the armor plate, and they could pump all kinds of bullets through the wheelhouse, and they didn't touch him because he was protected by the armor plate.
Mm-hmm.
And one time he had quite a sense of humor, and he had an understudy with him. And the understudy, when Uncle Ira was down preparing a sandwich, the understudy said, "Captain," he says, "I see a red and green light ahead. What will I do?" And Uncle Ira knew that that was the Fall River Line steamer coming down the bay, so and those were the side lights on the steamer, so he said to the understudy, "Go right in between them." And, as they got closer to the red and green light, he realized that there was a ship between those two lights, and had to turn a sharp course to avoid hitting the ship. And this fella didn't think it was funny, and he was the one who squealed to the police, and that's how they caught Uncle Ira.
What happened when they caught him?
Well, number one, he came into the dock, and he directed the docking procedure. It was in the thick fog. And then he put his hands up, and he was telling the men down below, he said, tie up that forward line and tie up that after line, and let's get those spring lines rigged. And then he had his hands up, and he gave the impression he tripped, and he fell over the side. He dove underneath the boat, come up under the dock, and went home. And
the police didn't get him.
But then the police came to his home and found him. And that's how that ended the career of Uncle Ira as a rum runner.